Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. I say it every week, but what a great privilege EWTN gives me to be the host of these interviews so that you and I can sit and relax and hear how the Holy Spirit has changed someone's life. Our guest tonight, Dr. Stacy Trasancos, is a former Baptist and atheist, but there's also part of her journey which I'm excited to hear about, and that's that relationship between science and religion. It was a very big part of her life, part of my life. So it's something that she and I share. So Stacy, welcome to The Journey Home.
Welcome. Thank you so much.
It's really good to have you here. You're the author of Particles of Faith, a Catholic Guide to Navigating Science, and I think still even after John Paul and all the popes that have so emphasized faith and reason and all those issues, we still are, so many Catholics are stuck about what do we do with science, but it should be something we rejoice and recognize as evidence of our great Creator God. So maybe we'll get there, but I'll just shut up for a bit and invite you. Let's hear the story. Start us at the beginning, if you would.
In the beginning, I was the size of a period at the end of a sentence. I always start back to when I was a child because I think that is what we need to do to solve this conflict myth between faith and science. I remember being a child, even though I was raised Baptist, my mom told me God made everything, and I was like, cool. Now I want to do science even more because I don't remember ever not loving science. And it was just a natural fit for me to look at the trees and say, thank you, God, and then learn about photosynthesis. I got away from that in college, started in high school. In college in 1991, the year that song, Losing My Religion, came out. I was just like, the Baptist raising didn't answer a lot of my big questions. It seemed just kind of like a club you could go to on Sunday mornings if you felt like it, the fellowship. And, I got to college and I thought, I don't feel like going. I feel like staying in bed. And besides the science I was learning at that level was answering a lot more questions about our existence. And so I thought science had the answers to everything.
Oh boy, it's so parallel to my own journey. But the point is, when you were a young Baptist, as you look back, do you think you had developed kind of that subliminal acceptance of a God? Whether you had a personal relationship with it or not, that there was a God, was that actually squelched in college or just kind of pushed aside?
It was very much pushed aside. I just decided like nothing bad happens to me today if I don't think about God. And so I guess I was a nun before nuns were cool, N-O-N-E. I just stopped caring. And I did know atheists back then, and I didn't even call myself an atheist because I just didn't want to think about it that much. I just did what I wanted to do, and I totally bought into, as a result, over the years, what we now call scientism. I didn't call it scientism then, but I truly did think science had all the answers. I truly did look at myself and later my children when they were born as highly complex composite systems of atoms and molecules doing their thing. And it really, I know firsthand that it really messes up how you view relationships. To this day, I have to work on thinking, my human relationships are not like atoms with their electrons orbiting, sharing in a bond, doing their thing by the laws of nature, that there's a creativity part to a relationship.
I wonder if this is true given all that. I remember that when you get caught up in, I always called it scientific materialism when I was in school in the early 70s. But what happened for me was, the reason I could push God aside is because it was like a conversion when I was discovering seemingly the answers that physics and chemistry and mathematics and biology could answer these questions. So I was drawn in this excitement of drawing that direction that God just gets forgotten. It is like a conversion.
Yeah, and you get so excited about it and you want to know about it. And what happened in my life when I did that, you don't see it at the time, but looking back now, I can reflect. What I ended up doing was compartmentalizing my life. The moral side, I did not know what to do with it. If I'm just atoms and molecules bumbling around, then I can do whatever I want. There is no morality. I can just, if I'm happy today, I don't care who I hurt. I can do what I want. And I didn't have any grounding there. I didn't have what they call a moral compass. Yeah. And the more that got messed up and that I made bad choices and I didn't know what to do about it or how to think about it, the more I just stayed married to my science. And I got really good at the science, and it became everything. And that was sort of the end of the road for me. It was, thankfully, I'm a very logical person. And I will follow logic to its end. I will think something through, because you have to do that when you design experiments, right? So you don't blow up the lab. And I would think the thing through, and it did hit me one day, this is a dead end. There's, my life has no meaning if I'm just atoms and molecules. I just become, like they say, worm food when my body starts rotting after I die, and that's the end. And then nothing matters. And so I knew, because at that point I had children, and I wasn't being a very good mom to them. I wasn't fulfilling their needs. And that's when I started to say, maybe science doesn't have all the answers.
Well, that's a work of grace.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember a course that I took in engineering school called physiological psychology. And in other words, the idea that even our thinking, our character, is caused by our biology.
Right.
So you begin to think of a person not only as atoms and things, but everything is almost, again, predestined by our very biology. So when you have that, then morality has there's no culpability. Right,
exactly. Only there is, and you know it, and you're not sure what to do about it.
Yeah, there's down here, that thing called a conscience.
Yep.
And how do you identify that? And how do you want to run away from it? I often wonder whether scientists, when something starts to spark an idea that maybe there is a creator, that what happens underneath is, well, then that means A, B, C, D, that you got to stop doing this and this and this and this. And, well, I don't want to stop that, so I'll put the idea aside.
Yeah. That literally happened to me. Like I had that moment. I wrote about it in Particles of Faith because that was a time for me to look back. My doctoral research in graduate school was simulating photosynthesis. And I had always loved trees, even from a kid, right? And I was doing it for good reasons. I was trying to simulate with my research team. I wanted to go to Penn State to be on the research team to find alternative energy sources. Like the sun fuels photosynthesis, which provides the biomass in the entire planet for all time that the planet's been having living things. If we can capture that process of the electron transfer when the photon hits the chlorophyll molecule, we can have an alternative energy source, which is more than solar panels. So anyway, I'm doing the research, trying to get an electron to jump one time across a polymer layer from one to the next. We had the electrochemistry worked out. 2 years, finally we got a paper published in the Journal of the American Chemical Society, and my professor said to me, now I want you to make the electron jump twice. And I couldn't do it. And there was one day I looked at my biochemistry textbook and panicked because I forgot how much detail there is. And I had this sense that I'm never going to graduate because I'm never going to be able to make that electron do what I want it to do. It's hopeless. And it was that day I looked out at this ginkgo biloba tree outside the 3rd floor of my lab, and it hit me. Those mindless leaves are over there flapping in the wind, doing what I can't. And I got so mad. Like it was a moment of grace, because for that moment I let myself say what I did as a child, that, oh my gosh, there's the greatest chemist of all out there who made this tree, and I'm just in the state-of-the-art laboratory trying to simulate a fraction of that process, and I can't do it. But I tell kids when I talk to them, I didn't convert then. I didn't convert for 15 more years. And that moment I turned around, well, I used pre-Catholic language to cuss the tree. And then I turned around, tightened my ponytail, and just got back to work because I just wanted to graduate. I didn't really care about the bigger question at that point, but I never forgot that.
Yeah, it really, how often does it strike us that all that we try to do to try and imitate something that God has done so simply, is beyond our ability. Here we are today with, we're finally getting to of robots. You know, think of what's going on that we didn't dream back when Hal was in the 2001 Space Odyssey. You know, we're still not even close to replicating what our wonderful Creator does in that little fluttering ginkgo leaf. Yeah. It's absolutely amazing. But you had that awakening and put it aside.
And just turned away. And it's not hard. All you have to do is say, nah, I don't care today. And, you know, it just, I think for scientists today who are atheists, I think more than anybody else, when they dig into quantum mechanics and all the things that go on at the atomic level, they know there is a creator. They know this is something far beyond human capabilities, this order in the universe. And you know, I think a lot of atheist scientists probably are okay with the intellectual part of it, but at the same time, and you know what I'm saying, when you understand the atomic level at that level of detail, that scripture that says God knows all the hairs on your head, it means something totally different to us, because we're like, and he knows all the atoms and all the keratin protein molecules and all the electrons there. It's like he knows everything about me. And he knows everything I've thought and done. And it's not so much the intellectual bridge getting to faith, it's that moment of saying, can I do what this God wants me to do? Can I live up to this new demand? If I grant assent in faith to the truths of the Catholic faith, that was for me, can I do it? I was afraid I wouldn't be able to do it well.
Well, you described it well, that when you came up to it, that sometimes the things that jump in the way are career, reputation, get my thing done. So, okay, I better put this thought aside. It also cracks me up that the scientists get down there to the atoms and they get all everything, and then they see this thing has a reaction against this thing, and there's something else there. There's something, I can't see it. There's something else down in there. So we give it a name. So we're talking about something we can't even see, but we know is there. Right. But God knows exactly what it is. He knows what it is. We just can't even see it. We get close to saying it, and we know there's something has to be there. There's a black hole out there. I can't look at it, but God knows what that is.
God knows. There's descriptive laws. There's prescriptive laws that God created, and there's descriptive laws we try to figure out. And I like to make that distinction. And this is a powerful thing, what you just said, when we're talking to young teenagers and college students who are going to go out in the world and have to talk to atheists. I have said this to atheists so many times, and they can't argue back with me, that for you to be able to do the scientific method, you have to adopt the Catholic worldview. I'm sorry to tell you, but that's what you're doing. Because if you think the world is these creation myths from the ancient, Babylonian and Egyptian creation myths, you can't expect the world to be ordered. And you can't expect yourself to be able to go out and understand it and make sense of it. So, just be Catholic then.
Our guest is Dr. Stacy Trasancos. I mean, the whole scientific method is based on the assumption that I can make a theory or hypothesis, and then I can go out and see whether it works or not.
Right.
Just that idea assumes that there's some order out there,
a creator,
some purpose.
Yeah.
Right. But it took you a while to catch up to the awakening of that you had.
It took me a while, but that's the nice thing I think that helped me about being a scientist. I was not afraid to follow the logic to the end. I wasn't afraid to search for truth, because as a scientist, I laugh when I say you can blow up the lab, but I'm dead serious. I worked for DuPont in a big factory telling the people how to turn the knobs and stuff so that the flow rates were right. If you don't think it through and follow the logic to the very end, if you're afraid that it might not be what you want it to be, you can hurt people. And so I wasn't afraid to follow it through. And once I realized that my atheistic views and my scientism were a dead end, and that my life was running out, I was in my 30s, that my children were growing up, and that I was not giving them what they needed as a mother, that I was hurting them, that there's something more than atoms and molecules there called a soul. Then I just couldn't run fast enough to the church once I started reading the Catechism, because the church was already thinking things through to the end and following the logic. And I know I had to grant assent to the divinely revealed truths of faith that we wouldn't have figured out by reason alone, like the Holy Trinity and the Incarnation. But I said to my husband, I'm like, this is just like deriving physics equations, because with physics, we observe what's in the world and we derive from there. Okay, well, with faith and dogmatic theology, we accept what God has revealed and derive from there. And that's where we get all the doctrines and teachings. And they make so much sense. Yeah. They're mathematically almost beautiful. You know, they are beautiful. They're almost mathematical. And I really fell in love with St. Thomas Aquinas then.
Well, I got to back up a bit, because you were Baptist.
Yes.
Right? Which wasn't exactly pro-Catholic.
No.
You may not have had and then you went through the scientific materialism. And then to be open to the Catholic Church, there's got to be something in there that, how'd you ever get introduced to even the great Catholic Aquinas? Yeah.
Well, so I married this man who's a cradle Catholic.
Okay, well, okay, there's a seed planted.
There's a seed planted. But yeah, how that happened was, part of the heartbreak of my 20s and when I say that I lived the atheistic, immoral, amoral, feminist lifestyle, like the woman just needs to go have a job and I don't need a man, I plowed through people. I broke people along the way. But I wasn't afraid to, I was literally like, don't tell me I can't do something, I'm going to do it. And I would do it. And I was very much always a kid who had to experience things for myself. And so as much regret as I have for those years, I know what it's like to live in a very dark, sinful place. I know what it feels like to, do all the things the church says not to do. And I really, the way it felt was like digging a hole. I got to the point where I just couldn't dig anymore. And I realized that my logic wasn't going to work. My life wasn't going to work. My children were broken. The two children I had at that point, wasn't married to my husband then. And I did, for the first time in many years, I'm like, all right. It's like I felt like I'd just been running a race, and I finally just stopped and said, I give. And there was one night alone, I just said, God, just give me one more chance to get it right, and I will go in this other path now. And so he heard me, and it wasn't that long after that, I was just walking in a hallway on this convention with DuPont, and my husband, who would be my husband, was there with his own company. And he just walked by me in the hall, and he looked me straight in the eyes, and the morning sun was coming in. It was so romantic. And he just said, good morning. And it was just like, we got married. He's a mathematician. We got married on 01, 02, 03. We figured that was a good way to start our life together. But I still didn't convert for a couple of years. But he walked with me every step of the way, because God gave me a man who could answer the level of detail that I would ask the questions, and I wouldn't let something go until I understood it. But I read the Catechism where it says children are gifts, and I'm like, that is the poetry I've been missing in my motherhood. And I left my job at DuPont. And before I even converted, I read that in the Catechism, and I was pregnant with our first child, my third child, and I said, he said, do whatever you want, I'll support you. For the first time in your life, do what Stacy wants to do. Think about it. And so I quit my job. I said, I'm going to stay home with this baby. She's 16 now, driving. And I just said that I'm going to start a path of conversion, but I had a lot of stuff to settle from my past. And I loved that the church said, it wasn't like being Baptist where the church is like, come on down, you can be part of us. Now, I had to fulfill these requirements. I had to go through RCIA. Yeah. I had to fix the relationships in my past that I had broken so badly. I had to go to confession, and that was very hard. I'd had an abortion, and I had to go to confession, so in those days, I remember my logic then was there's daily mass, and I had by that point. So when I said I was going to be open to life, we had those 4 daughters in 5 years, and in those early days, I had the one baby. Then I got pregnant right away. and that baby was born. So there was a couple of years where I had toddlers and newborns and pregnant, and I went to daily mass every day and crossed my heart when I went down, but I went as close to the Eucharist as I could get. And people around me would be like, why are you doing this? You don't have to do this much. And I said, look, I'm a chemist. And if somebody told me that Jesus Christ was going to be 10 minutes from my house every morning, really present in the Eucharist, this miracle we call the Eucharist, I would not just sit at home and miss it. I'm going to be there even if I can't receive communion. I'm going to be as close to Jesus as I can. And so I hauled those kids in, and I did that, and it was really beautiful for me to understand the Mass, just like everything else in our life. It's not all about us. It's about us saying yes to God. So those were very powerful years for me. It was my way of showing I'm serious about this, you know.
I can almost hear some atheistic biologists saying, or chemists saying, you know enough about that. How could you believe that that's Jesus?
Yeah.
How did you answer that question?
Because to believe is the highest degree of certainty there can be. I would say to that atheist, I may not know differential calculus today, but I will know it tomorrow because I'm going to go out and learn it, or in a year from now, or whatever it takes to learn it. But if I say I believe something today, but I might not believe it tomorrow, then I don't really believe the thing at all. Like, it was a total assent. I remember when I told my husband Jose in the kitchen, I'm like, I decided to believe. I grant assent, intellectual assent to the truths of faith. And I accept this because if there is God who is so far above any of us than even a parent is above a child, little children believe what their parents say because it makes sense. They don't know everything. Then we are compelled by reason to believe in God and what he tells us. And we're compelled to take those truths of divine revelation and reason forth. And, that made sense to me. It also made sense of my science because then I understood that the science I had loved was really me searching for truth, me searching for God, because science is the study of the handiwork of God. That's what I repeat now all the time, because that's the solution to this conflict myth, that we're studying the handiwork of God. And so I loved science even more. I understood how it fit into the greater knowledge of philosophy and theology, and how the physical creation is just part of the total system of reality that includes the supernatural. So I was just like so excited because my life made sense. It all fit together. And I had work to do, but I knew where I was going now.
Yeah, there's a part that seems to me that a purely scientific person misses, and that is that we recognize, from our perspective now, I assume you would agree with it, that a human has never created anything.
Right.
We've only discovered what God has put there.
Yes.
So our ability to split an atom to produce energy is something that God put there. Mm-hmm. And maybe he gave us a certain person at a certain time in history the grace to discover that. But the point is, we're responsible for what we do with that and how we use it. So just because we can do it doesn't necessarily mean we do it.
We should, yeah.
There's the difference, that we have to add science with our faith so that we use science correctly.
Virtuously. Yeah, and I say exactly that when I talk to young people, that it's not just that, like I say to young Catholics, if you become a scientist, people may say, how can you believe in God? You can't see him, like I remind them, we can't see electrons either. but that we need Catholics to not, and I say this to everybody, we don't need Catholics to just be defending against this idea that science and faith are in conflict. We need Catholics to get out in front of the whole thing and lead the way, because Catholics understand that the human person is body and soul, and that we have these Trinitarian faculties of intellect and free will, that we're supposed to figure out what the right thing is to do. And that the goal of science is to lead humanity towards Christ, whether it's giving us communication to do shows like this, we're supposed to use it in the right way. And so we don't just need Catholics refuting this idea, we need Catholics taking the lead, finding a way to be sitting at the table when bioethical decisions are being made. even if you have to elbow your way in, get there and help be part of the decision.
We need the best biologists, the best chemists, the best mathematicians, the best physicists need to be Catholics.
Yeah, and it works with young people. When you explain it to them like that and you tell them that when they discover something new in science, like you have to do at the PhD level, they're peering into God's handiwork in a way nobody else ever has before. Those kids, the years I taught some high school, I was at home teaching online, so many of those kids went on to become scientists, not just at Catholic universities, but also at secular universities, because they're ready to get out there and take the lead like I told them to. And it's just, I have this thing in my head, like I'm really big on knowing where I'm going, right? I'm trying to raise an army of Catholic scientists in the future, because I do worry about where science is going. There's so many things happening now that if there's not some virtue brought to the table to discuss prudence and justice and fortitude and temperance, bad things are going to happen. So, yeah.
You know, I've been very disappointed in the Catholic Church because of all the Christian traditions. It's the Catholic Church, for example, that emphasizes the beauty of music and art. But sometimes you go to Catholic universities and their music and art departments are not very good. And you go to an evangelical school, where do they got all the music and art? It should be at the Catholic schools.
Right.
The same thing with science. Why aren't there science and religion classes at every Catholic university?
I know. If I could have another life to lead and I didn't have just 24 hours a day, I would do that somewhere. I would, like go start a great, and there are good science programs at some Catholic universities, but it could be so much better. There's so much we could do. And I mean, we have, my first book is Science Was Born of Christianity, that builds on Father Stanley Yockey's work. Yeah. I wrote that because I want Catholics to know that science is our heritage. It's not just that we're not in conflict, it's that science was born of this worldview. And I say to people to go forward now. I mean, science is kind of like this adolescent that grew up. If it was born of the Catholic Church, it's grown up. It's just this adolescent that very much needs its mother to give it guidance. It needs to listen. So we have to help science mature, come back to that unity with philosophy and theology, and be guided by virtue. And I think that Catholics are uniquely equipped to lead in that way. And I call it completing the scientific revolution, like bringing science back around to the unity with philosophy and theology, but in a more mature way than when it was born.
That's why I think, I gotta be careful. We gotta, I love Thomas Aquinas. Yeah. We gotta remember who taught him.
Yes.
Albert the Great. Was very much into science.
Yes.
He was the bigger package, I think, than Aquinas himself. Let's take a pause there, and we'll come back in a moment. And I do want to remind you that if you go to chnetwork.org, which is my website for the Coming Home Network, you'll find lots of other stories, conversion stories, and resources just like Stacy's. And it'll help you on your journey in walking with our Lord Jesus in his church. So let's take a break, and we'll come back with more of Stacy's story. See you in a bit. Welcome back to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host. Our guest is Dr. Stacy Trasancos. And boy, there's so much I want to talk about. We just don't have enough time. Because this issue of science and religion, science and ethics, science and morality, we can't separate our science and our faith. They got to be together because they are together. Yeah. They are together. But do we see it in creation? I'm sitting here thinking that when you're speaking, you've got vocal cords that are moving, but nothing would come out unless wind came. Yep. The same way with the movement of the leaves in those trees. It's God's voice. But do we see it?
And I did, once I converted, I did see that stuff. And, my husband jokes because there were times when we lived up in upstate New York in the Adirondacks when the snow would be coming down and the stars were out, and I would just stand outside walking my dog and just cry because I am thinking, you don't ever quite get away from those chemical reactions clicking in your mind when you look at stuff. And you sort of, like, my materialism never went away. But it's so much, it's so vast. I mean, we don't even know all the chemical reactions that have to happen for your heart to beat one more time. I mean, all kinds of stuff is going on right now. And when we breathe, we're breathing in atoms and molecules that God only knows, literally, where they have been, not just on the planet, but in the universe, because the elements are all made out in the stars. And it's like, when you start thinking about all of that, how not just systems and plants and manufacturing, but the system of the total universe, one, it's all connected. I mean, somebody told me one time, I'm so glad you connected with so-and-so. And I'm like, well, we're all connected at the atomic level in very precise ways, because we are. I mean, you know, the molecules that make up our body, the elements, they've been here on this earth before, you know, longer than we have. And it's just, it's amazing when you start putting all that together. It's big awe and wonder, you know.
I want to ask one question before we move on to some other issues, but let's assuming that there's a Baptist watching right now. What difference does it make as a Catholic with the things you're talking about? You know what I mean? To understand faith and religion and all the things you're talking about. How do I understand the materiality of the world around us? From a Catholic person, why is that so unique for you?
So we are very much aligned with almost any other Christian denomination. I mean, Catholics. I do say this, and I don't back down from it. We have the fullness of the truth. If you want to follow the logic all the way to the end and be able to be guided there, you need to be with the Catholic Church that guards the deposit of faith. But there's when it comes to science, we can sit down and talk with just about anyone. I have long conversations with atheists, because I'm like right there with them, loving science, you know. It's just when you get to that peak, like I was looking at that tree in my lab that day, are you going to take that leap of faith, or are you going to turn away from it? And I really think I say evangelize through science, that if we can learn to accompany other Christians, atheists, non-believers, because science is such a big deal in our time, if we can accompany them and learn science and be with them and love it too, we can get them to that last point where they might have to make a very difficult personal decision to accept Christ. And they need a friend. They don't just need intellectual arguments at that point.
It seems to me another reason why our Catholic background is so important to this is because of the historical connections, which of course you brought out from your Stanley Yaki research, and that is that 200 or 300 years ago, when the Renaissance and the Enlightenment were spawning ideas that have so changed our world today, a part of that was the scientism that was developing to look at the world without God in a very subtle way until you could explain everything without God, but also that was a growing ignorant of the history before that. That was the foundation for everything we believe. And so our good Christian brothers and sisters that we share so much are sadly ignorant of how many Catholics were the founders for almost everything we believe today in science.
Yep, and that's why I wrote that book. Father Yaki's work is so hard to read, because he knew so much. And so I just took the basics of that argument that science was born of Christianity, and I covered it in a small book so that people could read it. But I titled it "Science Was Born of Christianity," just so that it would include all our Christian brothers and sisters, because we all share that in common. And then hopefully, you know, there's so many answers here that the person would say, like I did, where are the rest of the answers? They're guarded in the Catholic Church.
Well, you're particularly now, if you would talk about your present work, because in bioethics, and that you've got your finger in that too, and the importance of the science and religion when you're dealing with really. I mean, the one thing that science has done for us, it's opened up avenues of work that we never dreamed of even 10, 15 years ago. Yeah,
I write a column for the National Catholic Bioethics Center what I do is I look at the scientific research that's come out in the last 3 months and comment on it through the lens of faith. And so what I teach, and I also teach a class on this at Holy Apostles, but what I try to show people how to do is take the scientific article and appreciate it for the science that it is, even if the conclusion is troubling. But learn how to pick out what is contrary to our faith, what is consistent with the faith, or what's neutral, like what is neither. And just reject the things that are contrary to our faith, like the conclusion that we have no soul. Just reject that and say why. Say there's more. Yeah. And then say where there is consistency, and then work out the difficulty in the ethical guidelines in the other stuff. But it keeps us from all this sensationalism and overreacting to things that come out and whether they found the first human fossil ever, or there's a gay gene because 23andMe provides data banks. You just sort of have to stay confident and calm and clear. Yeah. And then you can lead people to Christ through science, like I say, by doing that.
Yeah.
But
the pervasive availability of information mm-hmm. that we now have is good and bad.
Yeah, big data.
We got all this information, like you said, 23andMe. Well, but do I know the people doing that database? Do I know, are they 100% accurate, 100% faithful? Or they? You don't know.
You don't know.
So don't base your lives on things of people you don't know, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And where they're coming from, or what their motives are, and what their goals are. There's our world with the media, which on the one hand is a gift from God.
Yeah.
But how are we using it?
Right.
And how do we protect our children on these important issues?
I think Catholics are sometimes, they succumb to the scientism of our day more than they realize. Like, for example, when there's a scientific paper that comes out with a conclusion that's troubling to our faith, they get scared that maybe that science is going to disprove something of our faith. No, we don't go there. We just say science is the study of the handiwork of God. If there's a conclusion that's troubling, it's because we don't know everything. And stay calm. Science is not going to cause Catholic dogma or doctrine to change. It's just that there are scientists making conclusions with what they've got today, and theories, scientific theories change all the time. So stay calm.
It almost seems today that because of the pervasive availability of all this information, that science has even become more political.
Yeah.
Than it used to be, and to the point where theories about things that are happening in our world, in our culture, in our ecology, it's no longer the old method of, well, this is just a hypothesis, now it takes some time to prove it, and before we go out there and mm-hmm. say what it is, it becomes political immediately, and I can't even have an opinion on it anymore. I mean, that's crazy out there.
Which is why we need Catholic leaders in the sciences who will do this stuff. A lot of scientific experiments are designed and get funding because they're chasing the wrong conclusion in the first place. And they're really just wasting time going down the wrong path. And they'll probably figure it out later, but a lot's going to be wasted in the meantime. So, yeah.
I'm wondering, did the writings of John Paul have any influence?
Yes, very much with, the Fides et Ratio really struck me, because I understood the using both faith and reason, but he also talked about knowing who you're meant to be as a person. So like the personhood thing was a big deal for me, because like I say, I don't just talk about scientism. I know what it's like to structure your whole life around this fact that there is no morality and that you are just, you have no meaning and purpose. I know what it's like to get up and wash the dishes thinking that way. And it's really hard to get motivated about anything except selfish things. But when I read that encyclical, I understood how the faith does guide your reason. And I do think faith comes first. And you can't really reason right if you don't have it guided by the light of faith. And I understood that. And I understood the human person is special because we have this rational soul. Yes, we have a responsibility, but all the more reason to grow up and get it right and to raise your children to know that. But I had a lot of trouble with relationships because in my mind, here's a person, here's a person. It's like two atoms. If they're going to bond, well, there's some rules about how they bond, and everybody's happy. It's like, don't take it personally, but don't get in my space, And there's very structured, but it's not like that with the human soul. Like when I bond, the bond of marriage, the closest bond, it was difficult. I mean, my husband and I have had many struggles, and we've prayed for the grace to see each other the right way. But that bond is there. But it's one of the hardest things to forge in your life is we're not the Trinity. We can't be in perfect communion. And so just understanding that it hurts, relationships hurt because their communion is broken because of original sin. But the only way we can fix that pain of discord with the people we love is to be united with Christ so that we restore what was lost with original sin.
There's an old cartoon that, one panel cartoon that shows, a scientist on his board with all the formulas, and then there's the miracle there that puts it all together. Poof, there's God, in that, and admitting that. It seems that another thing besides allowing God into the equation, which can be hard for a person, how do you let God in? Mm-hmm. Is the idea of grace, right? I mean, how do you explain grace?
Yeah, I named one of my children Grace, so I could hang on to grace. I described it, so I need pictures to understand things, and I described it very much like this, especially in marriage, but any other relationship too, that if we pray, so my prayer every day is, God, grant me the grace to do your will. Like, that's my one-line prayer. But I look at it as, okay, God will set the glasses of grace, like glasses of water. He will set them down on the table, the kitchen counter, wherever you need them, in abundance. But you have to pick the glass up and drink it in and let it change your life. And so I pray for the grace and I drink it in. But, I look back over the history of my marriage and relationships. There were times when I didn't drink the grace in. I just held my grace tall, and threw back my hair and said, look at me, I'm so holy. I wasn't drinking it in. And there were times in pain when my husband had to deal with things, and I, for years, held the grace out to a turned back, and I was drinking my own grace and holding it out at the same time to sustain myself to get through those. But that's the sacrament of marriage. I knew it would work out eventually, and it did. But it took years, and where the universe, people think, is yelling at you, get a divorce. You don't give up when you're like that. You know that this communion can be healed when God's ready for it to be healed. And it's such a beautiful thing that we have that.
Well, that's that description of what hope is. Yeah. You don't give up the hope. Yeah. There's a trajectory here. We know God's in this, so the hope, if I just keep trusting, the hope there that it'll be. I was thinking as you were describing that in terms of grace and the mystery of grace is that one way that science has had a negative influence in theology and religion over the last 300, 400, 500 years is this idea that there's an either or. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's science, either or. It's if this, then that. If not, it's this. That's computer language. It's either this or this. That's all of this. Computer just gazillion if-then statements. Well, but that broke up religion. Either God is sovereign and man has nothing to do with it, or man is totally to do with it and God's out there somewhere, But the beauty of the mystery, which is so Catholic, is that it's a both and. Yeah. God is completely sovereign, but yet in the mystery that we have our freedom. And that's where the grace fits in, is that both and. Yeah. So in some ways, your scientism has to be tempered a bit with the reality of the mystery of miracles. Mm-hmm.
But it makes your life so much fuller when you accept that, this comes in, I know this is out of the blue, but with the Adam and Eve question in evolution, I say that, don't look for the one final right answer. This is a situation where we don't know theologically or biologically all the things that are there to be known. But what you got to do is dive into that mystery responsibly. You got to keep your head about you. You got to know where you're going, but also accept that you don't know everything and you can't control everything. But that if you keep if you keep saying, God grant me the grace to do your will, you're going to have enough light to get a few more steps down the path each day and go the right way.
Yeah. Got an email. Larry from Canada writes, I have a relative who comes from a dedicated scientific materialist mindset. He doesn't seem interested in faith at all and says he is only willing to consider things that have the ability to be proven from a scientific standpoint. How can someone like this be convinced of the need of faith in God and how it doesn't need to replace the objective science, but rather complements it?
I think that this is where the life of faith comes in. There was a time when I was converting, I met a nun, and I had my daughter with me, and she had a friend with her that wasn't Christian, wasn't even a believer. And the nun just came up to her very confidently, like, why aren't you Catholic? You need to be coming to Mass. You need to, she was just telling her what you need to do, just calmly. But she was living this life of faith. She was so confident in Jesus Christ and her faith that she was just like, you need to be here. You need to tell your parents to bring you to Mass. Y'all need to be Catholic. And I thought that there were people along the way in my life that when it came time for me to say, okay, I'm going to grant assent to the truths of faith. I'm going to take that leap and accept this, and meaning I'll have to change a lot of things in my life. I had the confidence to do it, the courage to do it, because I saw that other people could do it too. And so that's not the answer you usually expect from a question like that, because I don't argue with people like that. I try to be like that nun, and I've talked to agnostics. I talked to Marcelo Gleiser, the one who won the John Templeton Prize this year. And he said almost the same thing. I don't believe in God because you can't prove it empirically. And I said, well, I do, and here's why, and here's how my faith informs me of my worldview, and it all hangs together, and it all makes sense, and I like all this stuff to fit. And I just said what I believe, but I didn't argue with him. I didn't look down on him. I mean, he's a great astrophysicist, and I respected who he was, who he is. But accompanied, I just said what I needed to say.
Yeah. And as I can vouch for, almost every guest that's ever been on the Journey Home program will say, the foundation for my conversion was the gift of grace every time, behind it all. Wasn't my intellect and all that, it was grace. So for a guy like that, we pray for him that God in his grace will awaken something in his life. Yeah. And it could be the very thing that he's looking at, thinking that proves that God doesn't exist, and all of a sudden you say, whoa, no, that is
something bigger.
Yeah, the fact that we can even trust our senses assumes
that, we're more than atoms and molecules.
I mean, duh. I mean, anyway.
When I pray for people, like my kids asked me one time, what does it do to pray for people? And what are we talking about, grace? And I said, well, I look at it like this. Remember the grace in the glasses of water sitting on the table. When you pray for someone, you're asking for so much grace to be around that person that it's really easy for them to drink it in, that they're just surrounded. So that's what your prayers do. You're surrounding them with a grace that will make it easy for them to see God.
Yeah, I mean, it's still their freedom to respond to it.
Yeah.
But it also, God might turn a light on in their mind.
You're thinking of them. So my kids pray for everybody's everybody. They figure they got the whole thing covered.
Very good. Another email, Pete from Denver. I'd love to hear Stacy's thoughts on how the Catholic Church has contributed to the scientific world through the centuries, and how we have nothing to fear from learning more about science and how it affects our lives today.
Okay, how much time do we have?
It's expensive.
Okay. So in the beginning, what's the first verse in the Bible? In the beginning, God created everything. And the ancient Hebrews, the early Christians, the scholars in the medieval times, even to today, Catholics are all united in that entire unbroken thread that we look at the world as God's creation. That has always been with us. It is a divinely revealed truth. And it always did guide this view of the world that is an ordered creation. And when Christ came and we understood the Trinity, that in the beginning was the Word, rationality, the second person of the Holy Trinity who became man, then that even made more sense of wanting to look at the world. And so the ancient religions all had some form of pantheism where they viewed the world as eternally cycling, like they see the cycles in nature, and they concluded from that the world is God, or that God emanates from the world. It was not creation. It was God is in the world. It was nature worship. And none of those cultures gave birth to modern science. You can say, well, they just didn't because they didn't. I say, like Father Stanley Yaki did, they didn't because they didn't have the right worldview. They didn't have a reason to. But Catholics did. And so that's our history. And today, I mean, modern science is here today because the scientific revolution happened in the 16th and 17th century, where we started applying mathematics to the motion of objects in nature. And we have all this technology today. Because of that, we understand how to manipulate the atom better than anything in science, I think. And so we really are at a moment in history where Catholics do need to be asking how we're going to help raise this child that we gave birth to, this adolescent, how we are going to lead the way forward. I think that is something that needs to be given serious consideration over the next few 20 years.
What an important point, and that is that it was the Catholic faith out of which science grew because of the worldview. And it didn't develop in other cultures because of their worldviews, right?
Right.
But the problem today is that with the proliferation of the information age, you have people in these other cultures that don't have a same value system, worldview, who've not only adapted the same scientific ideas, but have in some ways become better than us in their use of technologies. But the underlying ideas of culture, of world, of person aren't feeding their use of the sciences, right? That's what's getting scary out there in the world of medical ethics.
It is very scary, and I dive into that world, and it's very troubling sometimes when I read, this fetal tissue research that's going on and the embryos that are killed for research. It's more than you hear about in the mainstream media. It's everywhere. I can go out on any given day and find you hundreds of papers where they're doing it right now. And it's exploding. Look at where we are. We have the internet now. It's not just that we can control atoms and electrons to have all this media. It's that we don't have scientific journals like we used to have. We can publish them online now, and it's just exploding. There's issues with, who to believe and what's repeatable. There's a great opportunity to lead for Catholics right now and to evangelize our culture.
Yeah, we have people in cultures that do not have the Catholic Christian understanding of human beings that are cloning human beings or doing trans species, but without the formed conscience to know whether it should be done, and that's scary, right?
Something's going to have to be done.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's say you've got a scientist sitting out there that just happened to turn the tube, and there you are. What would you say to them? What would you like to say to them about their need?
Yeah, if you're a young person and you like science, we need you to become a scientist. Don't be afraid, be confident. Don't ever check your faith at the laboratory door. Let it guide everything you do. If you're a working scientist, tell people, it's really simple. Science is the study of the handiwork of God. And so just like we bless our meals, we look at everything and say, thank you, God. We do science the same way. We look at everything there is to discover and say, thank you, God, for this. And then we roll up our sleeves and go figure it out.
Well, let me push you a little farther. What if that scientist out there is a non-Catholic? Yeah. Should they make the same journey home you've made?
Of course, because then it's like taking off in an airplane and you see the house you grew up in all your life, like science was for me, but then you see it in this bigger system of reality. You see how it fits into a bigger picture. So it's very much like turning the lights on in your mind, and suddenly your life makes sense.
All right. One last little thought. We have a minute. I'm particularly thinking of, let's take, for example, homeschoolers out there that, for whatever reason, they've decided to homeschool. We homeschooled the area of science.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not asking you to be a marketer, but where do they go if they want to make sure they pass along what's a good, faithful understanding of science?
The St. Joseph Baltimore Catechism begins, God created everything. Just stick with that. And then my kids loved the secular science books like Holt and Pearson because they loved the science. But I was always right there telling them, God did that, God did that. And it's really that easy just to give them that correct view. Just tell them to pray the creed and mean it, you know, and then go out there and have fun learning about nature.
All right. Stacy, thank you very much
Thank you.
for joining us on the journey home. Lord bless you in your work and your witness, both as a Catholic, but as a Catholic who happens to be a scientist. I don't know, science Catholic or Catholic scientist, but you know. But thank you for joining us very much. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Journey Home. I do pray that Stacy's journey is an encouragement to you, not only to be a good, faithful Catholic, but if you're young especially, is God calling you to explore the world of science through the lenses of faith. God bless you. See you again next week.